Well, I want to welcome everyone. You've tuned in to Hawthorn University's Holistic Health and Nutrition webinar series, and I want to thank you so much for joining us as we welcome Sylvia Haskvitz for her presentation, Eat by Health, Not by Habit, Support the Change You Want to See in the World. This is going to be a unique presentation. As an expert in nonviolent communication and the connection to food and body, Sylvia is going to be sharing her insights and also role play with two of Hawthorn graduates. Sapha, Arias, and Whitham are both with us today. Let me give you a little background on each of them. Sylvia is a certified trainer and nonviolent communication and is a registered dietitian. Combining two of her passions, she has authored Eat by Choice, Not by Habit. It's a nonviolent communication-based book that applies this consciousness and language to our bodies and food. Sylvia travels around the globe facilitating and sharing nonviolent communication with those wanting to return to a state of joyful giving in a world where all needs matter and we meet our needs in cooperation with others and not at their expense. And as one of her clients says, Sylvia cares about what goes into your mouth and what comes out of it. Sapha Arias is with us, a Hawthorn graduate. She's a Houston-based intuitive healer, women's health and wellness life coach, and yoga teacher. She's been teaching yoga and meditation for over 10 years and has found a passion in helping women shift perspective and redefine their relationships to self so they can fully step into their own power and lead thriving and uplifting lives. And Sapha believes it is within our choosing to step up to the plate and fully embody the powerful creatures we were meant to be. And she uses a host of techniques from meditation to intuitive healing to nutrition to help women remember, embrace, and embody their feminine strength and vibrancy. And Kira is a functional nutrition specialist who helps women with autoimmune conditions to simplify their health and take control of their disease. She holds a master's in health and nutrition education from Hawthorn, as well as additional training through the School of Applied Functional Medicine, Metabolic Healing Institute, and the Institute of Functional Medicine. Kira combines the principles of holistic nutrition and functional medicine to help people bring their bodies back to their intended state of wellness. And she's a firm believer in the healing power of food and helps her clients make empowered choices while gaining an understanding of what nourishes and depletes the body. What a combination to have all together here this evening. All right, what are we going to learn? We're going to have some experiential learning, and all together we'll practice some conscious eating. We'll expand vocabulary of feelings and needs related to eating behavior and learn tools to support clients in creating a satisfying relationship with their bodies and food. We'll increase our awareness about our needs and develop skills to speak our truth with compassion, utilizing tools to support clients and be able to distinguish between a feeling and a faux feeling, contributing to a greater connection to yourself and others, and also be able to differentiate between a request and a demand in speaking and listening, which will support you in giving from a place of joy. It's going to be a lot, so we don't want you to miss a thing. Therefore, we're recording this presentation and it'll be available for replay on our website in a few days. We'll likely go about 75 minutes today. We'll have time for question and answers. So please write your questions or comments in the webinar question panel at any time. Also, there's a number of questions that are going to be posed. You'll see them in the chat box. There's 2 of them there already. When you're ready to answer, and we're ready for those answers now, put them in the question panel. And I'll see them and I'll be able to pose them and share them with Sylvia and our guests. There's also going to be a short survey to complete after this webinar ends. Just a few questions. We really appreciate you taking the time for that. Sure helps to have your feedback. And Sylvia has offered a gift of one of her books, Eat by Choice, Not by Habit, to one of you. So just all you have to do is fill out that survey at the end and you might be selected. I'm Paula Bartholomew. I'm one of the founders of Hawthorn. It's my great pleasure to be here. And now with all that said, I want to welcome you, Sylvia. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Paula. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to be here as well. While Paula was gracious enough to say, hey, let's play a little, and I like to play when I offer workshops, so I like to get you involved, and so we're going to do that the best we can. I want to share a little bit about kind of a little bit more about who I am and what brought me here. You see in this picture,
Sylvia?
Yes.
Sylvia? Sylvia, just one second. I want to also welcome Kara and Sapha and have you be able to say hello as well.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you.
Hi there.
All right, we've got all three of us here. Thank you so much. Back to you, Sylvia.
Thank you. So in this picture, you'll see a giraffe kind of hanging out at a kitchen table. And the reason you see a giraffe is because the work I do as well is nonviolent communication. I'm also a foodie. And so my excitement is to combine the two of them. I was asked a number of years ago to write a book connecting the two, my two loves, which is compassionate or nonviolent communication and eating and food. And so I did that. And how I did that was to really connect with what are some of the feelings and needs that we have often around food when we eat. And so the obvious is, I'm hungry and I want food. And the less obvious is there might be something else going on. There might be something that I'm responding to or reacting to, and food becomes a strategy rather than a need. So we'll differentiate today some of the strategies versus needs. So food is a strategy when really what I'm looking for is comfort. Or during this coronavirus piece, maybe what I'm looking for is some nurturance, or I'm really missing those hugs. And so food becomes a substitute. It becomes a strategy to meet some of those needs for comfort and nurturance. So in nonviolent communication, I'm going to show you just a little bit. I'm going to play here a little bit with you. So here is my husband and my therapy dog. And you can see the little giraffe there. And we use the giraffe as a symbol in nonviolent communication. We use it as a way to signify an open heart. The giraffe has one of the largest hearts of any land animal. And so we use that as a symbol when we open our heart. And this work of nonviolent or compassionate communication is really about heart, speaking from my heart. And so here's my goofy side. You see me on the right with my friend Jean, and we were goofing around in Tucson. So I wanted to just give you a sense of who I am. And one of the things with nonviolent communication that we focus on is feelings. So these are some feeling words that you might be experiencing at any time. And the reason we find this really valuable is when we focus on our feelings and we focus on our needs, then possible strategies or solutions kind of arrive to us rather than focusing on the solution. So if I'm upset and I know that I'm upset and I realize I really need comfort, now I have lots of choices of how I'm going to meet that need for comfort. But if I think that I need chocolate, then I'm really not connected to what my needs are. And it looks like I really don't have a choice. It seems that chocolate is really that need. And I know many of you would fight with me about that. But if we would look at the feelings and needs, it gives us a greater vocabulary to access what's going on inside of our hearts. So in this book, I combine both the emotional, so what are my emotional needs, and what are my body's needs? So really taking into account both my body and my emotional needs at the same time. In nonviolent communication, we have a loose definition of violence. And we say one of that is when I meet my needs at somebody else's expense could be seen as violent. So I look at it with our food and body and our emotional needs is if I meet my body's needs at my emotional expense, or if I meet my physical body's needs at my emotional expense, or vice versa, is that not a possibility of violence to my body? So I'm just looking at the possibilities of how do we play with that? How do we play with those feelings and needs? So these are some of the possibilities of feelings and needs. And we also talk about faux feelings in nonviolent communication, because sometimes I get confused with feelings and I think they're really heartfelt feelings, but I'm still in my head kind of judging somebody else or myself. So if I have those thoughts of I'm being smothered or trampled or threatened, that those are all what we'd call faux feelings. And so we'd want to take a step down and say, well, if I think I'm threatened, maybe I feel scared. And if I feel scared, maybe I want safety. So it helps us go down into a deeper connection with what's really true for us, rather than staying in our head in our judgment. So basically, some of the other things that I want to play with you around when we talk about food is that we have a food relationship. So from the time I was a child, When I was born, I started my relationship with food. Kind of like the same time I started my relationship with my family, with my parents. So it's that ancient and it's that complex. And so one of the things that I play with people in workshops is, what's your food story and how does that impact your life? How did that impact your life in the past, and what's still present that's still happening for you? So one of my food stories, when I was a kid, we had to eat everything on our plate. That was all part of it. So if you sat down to a meal, you ate everything. And I remember I really didn't like those peas from a can. Most of you are probably too young to remember those canned peas, but I thought they were really mushy and not very tasty. I was not excited about that. So I wasn't all that bright of a kid, and I would put my peas in my milk, not realizing or remembering that I needed to drink my milk. And then at the end of that would be even mushier peas. So I tried to put them under the table for the cat, and the cat ran away. So none of that worked very well. But it had an impact, that idea of having to eat something, sort of that have to, and so wanting autonomy, wanting a choice, wanting to know that my needs were also honored, that it wasn't just about a scarcity of not having enough food or not wanting to waste food, but really what were my preferences. And as a child, I remember when I'd get home from school, my mother worked from the time I was in kindergarten. And I remember I used to come home to these Brock's jelly beans, where every jelly bean had a different flavor based on the color. So here's some idea of needs. These are some possibilities of needs that might be connected to your feelings. This was in a workshop I did recently in China, and so you can see some of them are in Chinese as well, the needs cards. But it's a fun way to play with, what are my needs? And I really use this process for families, for children, really anybody, just to get a better sense of what's happening inside of you. How are you doing? So I shared a couple of little food stories. I think how those food stories affect my present, especially the jelly bean piece. I notice that when I'm stressed out, especially during this time, I notice I'm grabbing for more of those sweet things that in my past brought me some comfort or nurturance. So I'm really aware of that. And I know that my food story started really young, and that I was really excited about healthy food even from a very young age. That when I was a child, probably a few months old, my parents needed to buy a blender because I wouldn't eat regular baby food. It wouldn't work for me. So I'm wanting to play with Kira and Sapha a bit and just see what your food stories are. Are you willing to share part of your food story and how it affects maybe your current reality?
Yeah, absolutely. Which of us would you prefer to go first?
Either one.
Okay, I'll start if that's okay. So this is Sapha speaking. So I've got a really interesting relationship with stories to begin with. I think that stories define a lot of the ways in which we choose to assign matter to the world around us. So I really love that you're managing this concept. And for me, growing up, one of my own biggest stories had colored the way in which I related to food and made it so that I felt like I couldn't trust myself around my inner knowing of food. In other words, I believed I couldn't instinctively know, you know what, today I really would like to have an apple in this moment that feels really refreshing. Or, okay, tomorrow I would like to wake up and have some eggs. Things like those that are very innate in terms of how our intuition tells us what the body needs and what it doesn't. Same, I felt maybe I wouldn't know when to stop, oh God. And we hear this kind of story, I think, a lot, is if I eat a piece of chocolate cake, I'm never gonna be able to stop. I can't trust myself. So the story was I couldn't trust the food or myself and my own intuition around the food. And how that affected me, coupled with a couple of my other deeper stories, one of which was a really big impact in my life, which was the story that I wasn't good enough. It created this really distorted relationship with food, which later led me to have an eating disorder, which was actually kind of a blessing in disguise, because having gone through all of that and finding a lot of peace and awareness and presence through my practice, through my meditation, and later in much deeper study of self, I was able to then heal that story, find a lot of play within my own world, and realize that I can, in fact, trust myself, trust my intuition, know that I can indeed stop eating more than just one slice of cake if I need to, and know that I can trust my body to tell me, hey, we are in need of meat today. Let's go and see if we can, arrange that for ourselves. Or I've had enough. I don't have to finish my plate. I'm good. So that kind of thing, I think, is where I found my story.
Wow. So let me just see if I'm getting it. So basically, if I frame it into the needs that you were meeting. So one is that I heard the trust piece, like you weren't able initially to trust yourself or your
Correct.
trust intuition. And then it brought up, so that not good enough, I'm guessing that was sort of a sense of really wanting competency, really wanting to be valued or to know that what you were doing was important.
Correct, that it had worth.
That it had worth, yeah. And then the peace and presence part you talked about. So the blessing was kind of, there was some sense of inner peace that you found through this
Yeah.
with food.
In moving deeper, yes, sorry to interrupt you again, but in moving deeper into the actual story and sort of like the shade aspect of it, I was able to see it for what it was, embody it a little bit more deeply, and heal it, and move through and past it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and so you found some inner peace basically with your choices around food and your relationship with food.
Correct.
Hmm. Wow, thank you. And so I'm guessing there's, in your work then you're doing, I'm guessing that has a big impact on your clients because you're able to kind of touch that story and know that other people struggle with something very similar.
Yeah, tremendous. And so it's a big focus for me, specifically with women, because I think that we encounter this type of narrative much more often. So it's in my like heart of hearts, in my spirit, to help women shift the relationship around food and self. And it's what I call healing core wounding. We take a look at the stories that we tell ourselves from when we were young and the meaning that we assign to them and how they affect us. And I say this having literally just come face to face with one of my big stories, like not even 20 minutes ago, after like going for a run and having a major breakdown. So it's interesting because to me, what makes a great teacher and a great practitioner is the openness to continue developing and to continue growing and to acknowledge that we're still doing the internal work.
I love that. Thank you for that. Yeah, because that's really, we're all on that path, right, of learning and growing. So it's a never-ending path. So to be able to have those breakdowns and be vulnerable and share that with your clients, what a relief to be in a world like that.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you. Beautiful.
All
So,
right, I'll
yeah.
go. So I mean, I thought as a child I had a pretty good relationship with food, although Sylvia had to laugh at the pea comment because I was literally thinking something very similar. I remember moving peas around on my plate and as a child actually running out back if my parents weren't around and I would dump the food into the creek. So, I mean, I definitely at an early age had some issues around vegetables and not being able to make my own choices. But my story started a bit later in life. I always dealt with chronic digestive issues. And in my early 20s, they sort of hit a head. And I was so frustrated. I wasn't getting any answers. I was being told to eliminate certain foods, try taking out citrus, try taking out tomatoes, chocolate, coffee. None of that made a difference. And so it almost created a fear of food. I started getting resentful of food. Okay, this isn't going to make a difference, so I'm going to eat anything I want. And so in my 20s, I started adopting really bad habits because I felt like it doesn't matter. I'm going to have issues no matter what. So I'm going to eat the donuts. And I would go get, a dozen donuts and throw back, several of them at once, or drive through fast food and just really not pay attention to my choices because, like I said, I was almost resentful of food at that point. And then my story changed when I started realizing that, okay, maybe the food right now isn't making a difference, but if you can start adopting healthier habits in time, that's going to change. So then I almost went to the opposite end, and I would say that it became a bit of orthorexia, meaning, for those listening that don't know, I was obsessed with healthy eating. I totally flipped the script and I started thinking, okay, if I don't get these servings of vegetables in a day, I have to get them in before I go to bed. And beating myself up if I ate that piece of chocolate, or if I had a piece of bread, but I, didn't meet my macronutrient level that day, then I'm regretting that. And I'm starting to feel all these other emotions around food that I never felt before. It's like I went from resentful to resentful on the opposite side, because then it was like, I have to meet my macronutrients. I have to get my vegetables in. If I don't do this, I'm not good enough. So it's been an interesting journey, and obviously that has all healed now, and I believe that I can have those treats in moderation.
Wow, that's quite a story. So what I'm hearing from your story is what we call in nonviolent communication. It sounded like you had an autonomy tantrum. Like the fact that, like, I want to eat anything because I realized that whatever I was doing before wasn't working anyway. So why not just do whatever I want, right? Yeah. So, and I find a lot of people have those autonomy tantrums. It could be that, maybe the mom said you can only eat a certain amount of sugar in your cereal. So she would pick out only cereals that had under a certain amount of grams per sugar in each serving. And so the kid, like, as they grow up, said, well, I'm going to eat whatever I want. So that restriction, especially when you're younger, and I hear for you it was a bit older, but often when we're younger, there's so few things that we have any responsibility for, right? We have to go to school, we have to go to church, we have to. And so the one thing we can control is food. Yeah. And so often people have those, what I call autonomy tantrums. And so I could put that into sort of what we call the obnoxious giraffe stage. And so what that means is, I've given up my needs for so long. Like I've had all this digestive issues for your situation, and I'm really tired of all this. And so I'm just going to do what I want because it's not going to matter anyway. So it's like, now it's time for me to take care of myself, my emotional needs, and screw my body's needs for that moment. Yep. Pardon my French. And so what I'm hearing is, in the end, you found some sort of a balance. Like, how can I take care of my needs, my emotional needs, and my physical needs and nutritional needs, without necessarily a negative impact on my emotional health as well. Am I getting any of that?
Oh yeah, spot on.
Yeah. So thank you for that. So how does it, like all of those pieces, I'm guessing that really supports you with your clients as well, and as far as relating to them. Are there people that specifically come to you around those issues that you can really support?
It's funny, I don't think they necessarily come to me with that issue, but when we dive into the diet, it's almost like I'm attracting people that are similar to where I was. So these are ones that have tried really restrictive diets to try to feel better, but they're not feeling better. And so then they get more and more restrictive until they're down to, a handful of foods. And then they're fearful to add in anything new because they're afraid those symptoms are going to come back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's the real restrictive because you want to ensure, you want to trust that everything's going to be okay, and you're not quite there trusting it yet. Yeah, thank you for that. There's something I read today which was interesting. I'd never heard of this concept. It's called kuchi sabishi. Have you guys heard of that in Japanese? Kuchi sabishi. It's called lonely mouth. And apparently it's happening a lot with this COVID-19, where people are experiencing more of this lonely mouth, which is, putting stuff in your mouth right now because you're feeling alone or not very connected or feeling sad. And so you're using food as a way to soothe or to nurture. So I'm wondering about how you guys are doing with this whole sheltering in place. Like, what's happening for you about the self-quarantine? How does it impact your relationship with food in the moment?
I can go first, I guess. Honestly, it hasn't had a drastic impact on me. I already worked from home exclusively anyhow, but I will say that some of that emotional eating comes back into play. I'm finding myself raiding the pantry in the evening and opting for some foods that I probably wouldn't have been having in the past, because sure enough, those emotions are coming back in and I'm not addressing them, and I'm just eating some of that stress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a curious thing, that whole like natural versus habitual. And we use that in nonviolent communication as well, thinking that our natural state was really, kind of like you'd feed a dog, where you could just put food out when they're puppies and they would eat when they were hungry and they'd leave it when they weren't, or when you were a baby and you'd, take milk until you were done and then you were done, right? There wasn't that emotional connection to having it. But it seems that when we're under stress like this, that so much of those habitual ones come back again, even if we've gone to more of that natural state of honoring kind of what's happening. Yeah, thank you for that. And that was Sapha, is it? And Kira, can you respond to that as well?
That was Kira, so I'll respond. Yeah, so it's been an interesting couple of like months, let's call it, because I feel like it's been since the beginning of the year for me. But no, I work a little bit at home and then I work a little bit out. So it's made some difference in that I'm not leaving the house as much, but I'm not feeling discomforted because I tend to be so introverted that this actually feels really okay to me. And what it's actually allowing me to do is explore more in terms of my timing, because I have more time in my hands now to cook, to really sit down and maybe bake something, or to allow myself to meal prep for me and my partner for the rest of the week. So it's fun because I get to do things that I maybe normally don't, just by the fact that I don't have time.
Yeah. So that spaciousness is helping you to maybe create in the kitchen in a way that you enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm. Thank you. And I'm wondering if there's any questions from anybody in the audience that's kind of struggling around this whole issue. Like, and I know it's changing because things are opening up a bit more, but how has it been, the whole self-quarantine or the sheltering in place around your relationship with food, and anything else that you've noticed that maybe you would like addressed? I know it's
So that's a direct question to you all in the audience, and to respond to it, please write your answer into the question control panel, and I'll see it and I'll be able to share it with Sylvia. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
And so it'll take time. I suggest you continue while this goes on. But you also had other questions, Sylvia, for people to consider. One of them was, what would have you dancing out the door at the end of this presentation? Meaning, what needs do you want to meet by attending this session? So please consider that, and anything else that you'd want to contribute or have Sylvia address for now. And I think you should continue, Sylvia, then.
Sure. So I'm going to address some points, and Kira and Sapha, I'm not sure if you're seeing these, but these are some of the points that I've played with Eat by Choice. So focusing on your needs for health and well-being in changing your eating behavior, and not the strategy of a particular number on a scale. So we look at numbers on a scale as a strategy, and when we look at the needs, all sorts of things pop up. So I wonder if either of you have something to say about that.
Kira, do you want to go first? Do you want me to go?
If you have an immediate thought, go for it.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
I'm just moving forward. Then have Sapha go first, and then Kira.
Okay.
Okay,
for organization
yeah, that makes it orderly.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I mean, I'm just kind of reading through it right now. I really like what you're saying in so many of these things. I'm laughing as chocolate is not a need. But I think it's a powerful thing to think about. I mean, I always use the analogy of a car to my clients, saying that, you put gas in your tank, right, to get you from point A to point B. Why aren't we thinking of our bodies that way? As much as we enjoy chocolate, or, whatever treats are out there, it's not necessarily going to get us from point A to point B. So I think we need to consider our body as the engine and allow for some of that water to get into the tank, so to speak.
Yeah.
And treat it like it is a treat.
Well, that's what I find so funny. So many times if I were to go to like Best Buy or somewhere and people are looking at a computer, they spend so much time and energy, like what are the components and what does it have and what does it do? And it's so important. But I think how many people actually look at the ingredients of what they're putting into their mouth? It's sort of an oddball thing that we don't often think like that. but what we're putting in is really becoming a part of us. And like you said, it's fueling us or not. So it's kind of a key piece.
I'm absolutely loving all of this. To me, it's interesting because they are things that I discuss with a lot of my clients constantly. But for me right now, one of the biggest ones is number 3, because violence of self includes words like should, have to, and must, has been one of the biggest lessons for me for the last 2 or 3 years. I find that in terms of how we relate to ourselves and the world around us, very often we choose to assign meaning to things. Again, partly based on and also I'm getting a bit of feedback.
You cut out for just a minute. If you could go back one sentence, we could hear the rest.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I was getting some feedback and I couldn't tell if you were able to hear me or not, or if something had gone wonky. So yeah, my point is I find that in terms of how we relate to ourselves and the world around us, a big a big sort of way in which we choose to assign matter and meaning to things and how we let them and how we choose them in our day-to-day lives has to do with our stories and the boxes that we put ourselves into, just because ego is trying to protect itself. In other words, ego likes to see the world very linear and very black and white because it's trying to protect us. And so it'll say things like should, have to, must, because it feels like it gives it a sense of control, which is just an illusion. And within that realm, what ends up happening is we create very deep-seated rigidity. And in that space, the things that we often tend to assign most matter to, not only are they often external, but then they can be very compromising in terms of how they affect ourselves. In other words, you wouldn't talk to your loved ones the way that you talk to yourself, you know? Yeah. So, and things that usually make you feel like you have to will feel very heavy. You know, the second you think about, oh, I have to do this, I have to do that, it's the stress, it's the heaviness, it's the almost like your heart almost becomes constricted. And I like that idea of the giraffe having a super big heart, because to me, it resonates with this. Yeah, the other parts of that is just the keys of awareness, right? Just because you are moving through something doesn't mean you have to be reactive. You've got the choice to be proactive.
Thank you. Yes, that's perfect, because that choice piece, and that's, I think, where the violence comes in, where we look at it as violent to yourself, because when you do that should, or that have to, or that must, basically you're taking away choice. And we call it, so that the opposite of the giraffe, we call the jackal. And the jackal we use as just a symbol again, as a way when we're very hard on ourselves. That could be our critical self. That's the one that's kind of bossing us around. You know, you should do this or you shouldn't do that. And so again, we try to relate to what are the needs behind the should. So rather than saying just stop or don't say anything or stop the shoulding on me or stop being so critical of yourself, we look at what are the words behind it that I can really connect with. Well, when I say I should or I shouldn't be eating chocolate, what's my need? Well, I really want to honor my body. I really want to make choices that are in alignment with my values. So now it gives life to what I want rather than what I think I should. Because every time we have a demand, even within ourselves, we want to resist it. So many times clients will say, well, I really shouldn't be eating that, but I did. And so the shoulds create that resistance because, again, our autonomy kicks in. We say, but wait a minute, I want to have a choice here.
Yeah, and I think that that's a big point to how diet culture itself affects us, because it's those shoulds have a big drive to externalization. You know, you have to look like this, you should weigh this much, you must not eat or eat this to be good or not good, etc. And it creates a lot of disconnect within ourselves. So again, it goes back to kind of my own, I'll use myself as an example, my own story around food, that you cannot trust yourself or food or yourself around food. And then it engenders that cyclical sort of reverberation of, okay, I'm going to be good now, quote unquote good. And then you think you're doing well, but you're restricting yourself to the point where you're miserable.
Right.
And then all you're doing is putting yourself in a place of dis-ease and disconnect. And then you end up, quote unquote, breaking the diet or whatever. And you start the cycle all over again because you're feeling out of it. You're not really connected. And a lot of that trust also too affects some of the other points that you address here in terms of, listen to your hunger cues. Are you really hungry, or are you feeling maybe disconnected or unheard? Are you needing some other emotion to be filled? Perhaps you're still running away from some aspect of shade that you haven't fully sat with and healed, and that's what's coming up for you. Or are you choosing to give yourself permission to eat that cookie because right now it's going to bring you joy, and then you're going to be okay with it? So there are so many different elements, and there's so much little nuance to all of this that I just think it's a really beautiful play.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And I know sometimes, when there's that should, or God, I shouldn't be eating that, but I am. And I notice that for myself, when I do that, then I probably eat way more than I would have had I just taken a piece of whatever it is I wanted and really enjoyed it. Yeah. Yeah. So I want to call your attention to 6 for a minute. It's checking your duck meter. And so I said I'll explain, which I'll do. So I brought this work of nonviolent communication to somebody in the Bay
Sylvia?
Area. Yes.
We have some audience answers to your question about quarantine eating, if you want to respond to those now.
Great. Let me just finish this one thought and then I'll be right back to you. Thank you.
Okay.
So what that means is, so here there's somebody who liked what I said about Marshall Rosenberg, the founder of this work of nonviolent communication that I share. He talks about the joy of a child, a hungry duck being fed by a child, getting a lot of joy. That whatever we do, if we do it with that spirit of a child feeding a hungry duck, that it's all about nonviolent communication, or compassionate communication is all about that. It's all about that spirit of joyful giving and receiving. And so after I offered this workshop, one of the fellows that came, he went back to his house and his wife said, "Hey, will you take the garbage out?" And he said, "Well, let me check my duck meter." And so what happened is, if it was something joyful for him to do, he would say yes, and he would do it. And so he decided that 10 was a lot of joy, and 7 was kind of less, but still joyful, and 1 was like root canal. And so he decided from that moment on that if somebody asked him to do something, if it was under a 7, that he would say no. He'd ask you to do it yourself or find somebody else, because it wouldn't be with joy. And then he would be resentful on some level and angry, and it really wouldn't be a gift. And I find a lot of people that struggle with eating, with their food or relationship with their food, often they do things in a way that they say yes when they don't really mean yes. And then they find themselves in the refrigerator to give them what they really want. So it's a way to nurture myself when I really didn't take as good of care of myself as I might have liked. So I'm happy to go to some questions from people that are participants.
Well, you had asked people about their COVID eating habits, and so this attending says, the cleaner I eat, the less cravings I have. So I've just tried to keep eating clean during quarantine so I don't start heading downhill.
I like that. Eating clean during quarantine. It's even a rhyme.
It is.
Beautiful. Yeah, I like that. I notice for myself, when I eat that way, I also feel better. And it definitely does help me to think clearer so I can actually make more of the choices that I want to make. So thank you for that point.
And then another one is, I've been noticing my judgment around eating and how it's related to self-worth and self-discipline. How can I improve my relationship with food intake? Can I truly trust my instinct?
So instinct, I find, is a really interesting thing. Is it your intuition? So some people, and I'd love to hear, Kira and Sapha, what you think about this, but I've heard many times people will say that what they crave is actually not necessarily so good for them. So any sense for you about cravings and what they really represent?
Yeah, a little. So for me, intuition, particularly, what I love about it is intuition really is not tied to emotion, in that it's more like an inner knowing. It's kind of like walking into a room and immediately feeling something is off. That's more intuition, but it's not tied to an emotion. Whereas I find where a lot of times we allow our emotions to get really, really rampant without even being able to know what they are first. And then that can sometimes push little buttons, like I was saying about the cookie. Maybe you woke up in the morning and you'd had a really rough night the day before or whatever, and you haven't dealt with the internal work of really sitting with it and processing it and letting it heal. And your first instinct is, oh my God, I'm craving that cookie. I have to have it now. And you think that that's your intuition, but if it's that emotional, and if it's driving you from such almost like a, I don't want to use the word desperate, but if it's driving you from like such a heightened state, then it's probably better for you to pause for a moment and really get deep with what's actually going on. If the sensation is still there, then potentially yes, what you really want is to give yourself the chance to be there. But yeah.
Thank you. I like those distinctions. Yeah. Yeah, the urgency, what I'm hearing also, that urgency of the request, which in our work of nonviolent communication, we would call that a demand. Like if we sense there's an urgency, then it's likely that demand energy. And when something's calling to us from that place of demand, I always want to stop, like you said, and really think, what is really going on here? What's really true for me? Because the demand is often the strategy driven rather than really the needs connected. Yeah, for that.
Well, and I view cravings as two different things. I mean, usually I stop to evaluate, okay, what is this craving? I mean, we'll use chocolate as an example again. If someone is consistently craving chocolate, I might consider, are you deficient in a nutrient perhaps? And so your body's speaking to you in that way. Just like if you're constantly craving, I don't know, salt or something like that, if it's consistent. However, kind of like Sapha said, if I just once in a while find myself craving donuts or chips and it's not a consistent thing, there's emotions that I'm just kind of putting on the back burner, and I usually don't want to address them. I'd rather just eat them, unfortunately.
I love it. So really it's about number 5. If you find yourself surfing the refrigerator, let's say, and you had a meal a half an hour ago, check in with yourself and identify the needs you're connected to in the moment, because that's where the choice is in that moment when you pause. So whether it's, whatever it is, if you pause before you then make the next choice, it's likely going to be more in alignment with what your body needs and what your emotional body wants as well.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Is there another question or two before we move to another?
Yes, certainly. Good question here. How do you find the balance between being easy on yourself to get the comfort that you're looking for and focusing on nourishing your body?
I love the question because I love sweets, and part of me thinks, well, maybe I'm not getting enough protein. If I'd eat more protein, maybe I wouldn't crave sweets as much. I think there might be a connection there. But I also know that I just really like that flavor. So how can I have both at the same time? So how can I both nurture my body and eat something yummy too? So for me, it's not mutually exclusive. I really don't enjoy those diet foods in quotations or anything where it's somehow less good than I'd really love. So I'll make chocolate chip cookies, but my chocolate chips might be made with coconut sugar, and maybe my flour will be almond flour or cassava flour. And so I make those kind of treats that really taste good and actually have nutrients in them too. So that's one possibility. Kira, Sapha?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what you just said, and I love it. For me, it's about compassionate awareness. It takes a lifetime to get to know yourself, right? But if you learn how to root down into who you truly are and what it is that you really need, then it's a little bit easier. And you can give yourself permission both ways, right? You can give yourself permission to have, let's say, like the McDonald's fries one day and not beat yourself up over it, not like over exercise or try to sweat it out or immediately go back into a diet and get frantic about it. And at the same time, you can make those choices and know, wow, I really love savory, salty, crunchy foods, but I don't want to hurt my heart arteries, for example. So what would be the best choice here? And perhaps you find an alternative where it is a baked chip versus something else, or you have someone who has an air fryer. I'm just kind of going with like the first example I can think of, but you can apply that to almost anything, right? It's a matter of also knowing yourself so deeply that you know oh, this is what makes me tick. I feel really loved, really nourished, really satisfied when I eat chocolate. Okay, so perhaps instead of eating a Reese's Pieces, then you can get some dark chocolate. And if you really like peanut butter as well, then you can add some peanut butter that is like real peanut butter, etc. So there are always choices to make. But to me, it's also about knowing that it's okay. It's okay if you did wake up in the morning and had, you know, the chocolate ice cream from wherever, and have compassion for that, but know that it doesn't define you, it doesn't rule you, and it doesn't have to mean that from then on, oh, that's it, I screwed up, so now that's it, I'm not gonna like eat well forever, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, so the thing is, what I'm hearing is, how do I give myself permission at times that I want to choose those foods that I know probably aren't as helpful? And how do I have compassion and care about that rather than beating myself up, so that I can make those choices on occasion, but they're not regular choices?
Right, yeah, and it's a matter of kind of stepping away from the old rigid ideas of, again, we go back to the shoulds and musts, right? You don't have to eat clean all the time, and you don't have to be quote unquote good to be healthy. I think a lot of times it's the way that we almost self-flagellate ourselves that gets us most. Whereas if you give yourself the freedom to understand that it's okay to, on occasion, have, you know, that chocolate chip cookie, then it's a lot less likely that you'll have a freak out or that you'll go overboard and over binge on something if you know that it's okay, it's available. And also to listen to yourself, you know, do you really need to eat the whole cake? Not really. So can you have a bite or two and be satisfied? And will that hit the spot, so to speak, in a loving way, and also in a way that doesn't push you past the place of contentment?
Yeah, so you're also talking about like what's sufficiency rather than what does it feel like abundance rather than scarcity, rather than like limiting myself, having some sense of abundance, but knowing that I can do that in a way that's uh, when you say not going overboard. So I can do that and also have some kind of limitation to know that I can stay connected to what's important to me at the same time.
Correct.
Thank you.
So there's a couple more here that I think might be relevant. One's more of a comment, and one's really a question. I think it's very meaningful for here. Do you have time for that?
Sure, absolutely.
So the first one is during COVID, saying that I actually felt like I had a great opportunity to be consistent in eating the nutrient foods that sometimes get interrupted by travel or an otherwise busy schedule. My husband and I had a great cooking experience of all our meals and being happy at home. Good positive story, right?
So celebrating that you were maybe able to cook together and dine together and make food from scratch.
Right. So this one says, I've definitely been having issues with food since lockdown. I am lonely even though I do a lot of online stuff. It's not interactive enough. I'm longing for connection. Food is a distraction for going deeper into my feelings. For some reason, this is a little too abstract without seeing people.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe it's a little frustrating to not actually get that connection, because I'm hearing that connection is really key, and without connection, then looking for some alternatives, which food might play one piece of that alternative. Yeah.
As she said, this may lead to other cravings and wanting to keep eating, looking for the nourishment that she needs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's more of a challenging time, absolutely, because I would say, when you're in choice and you could say, wow, right now I find myself in the refrigerator and I just ate a half an hour ago, so it's not food I'm really hungry for. What is the need? And I might say comfort, or I might say, gosh, I could really use a hug, or I'd love to get out and move, or I'd like to hang out with a friend. And that may or may not be possible right now. So my choices might be a little bit more limited. So how do I have just some love and compassion for myself in mourning that that's not possible, possibly at this moment? And are there other things I could do to really nurture and take care of myself?
Yeah. Okay, then coming back to the present slide,
Oh,
this one's saying loving number 4, wondering how we can connect to that moment to take a pause, slow things down to support mindful choice.
yeah.
And please speak a bit more about number 6 too. So there's
Yeah.
one thing and moving on.
So number 4 and number 6. So for me, choice, that pause that we just talked about. So when we talk about cravings as well. So gosh, I really have a hankering for that piece of pizza. You know, I really want some pizza. And so if I look at what's happening for me, so something, maybe I saw a Domino's, you know, car go by or something, somebody with a Domino's thing. So there might have been a stimulus there. And so I want to check in with myself, what is happening in this moment? Like, what is that? Is it that I can taste the yummy dough, or do I get that sense, that mouthfeel inside? Or do I think back about, you know, when I had pizza nights with my family? Like, what's being stimulated by that? And so if I look at that, so there's a stimulus there, and then if I take a pause and say, so what is it really? Is it about nurturing right now? Is it about feeling connected to my family? What is it? And when I connect with that, then I can respond from a place that's much more connected to my needs rather than just an automatic or a habitual response. So the pause really helps me to tune in and to check out what's really true for me. And the 6 I heard, yeah, so checking out my duck meter. And what I mean by that is that I find so many times that people that have difficult or challenging relationships with food and their bodies, that again, they might be saying yes to other people and other people's requests, but maybe they're not taking as good of care of themselves. And so what happens is, if I give from a place that's not so joyful to others, sometimes what I want to do then is to give to myself. And giving to myself might be kind of the reward system, or a sense I'm going to reward myself with chocolate because I really didn't want to do that. Or I just got into a fight with my boss, and so I'm going to go give myself something. So instead of saying yes to somebody's request, I would invite you to check in with yourself and see if it's a full yes, a full-hearted yes, or if there's really something that's keeping you from wanting to say yes, but you're afraid to say yes. So that's an invitation. Paula, any more comments or questions?
Not right now. You're free to move forward.
Wonderful. So I'm just going to end with this little piece about 10 things you can do to contribute to internal peace connected to your relationship with your body and food. And this is kind of bringing it back to nonviolent communication. So one thing we can do is, how do we spend some time reflecting on how we'd like to relate to ourselves and others? So this could be just a meditation. What's my intention for how I want to be with myself and others? And 2 is about remembering that we all humans have the same needs. And food is both a need and a strategy. So we need food to live, but it's also a strategy often to meet needs for comfort, for fun, creativity, play, celebration, and many, many more. And so before eating, checking in with yourself to see if you're eating because you're hungry, or if eating is a strategy to meet other needs. So it's just a quick way to check in. How am I feeling right now? What's going on with me? And then checking your intention to see if you're as interested in your well-being as much as others' well-being. So this is the balancing. This is sort of the joyful giving. This is the interdependence part about nonviolent communication, which we're seeing a lot during this whole COVID-19 crisis as well, the interdependence of all of us. And we talked just a minute ago about the joyful yes, the duck meter. When being asked to do something before saying yes to a request, check your duck meter first. And when you notice self-talk about your body and food, assess if you're treating your mind and body as a friend or a foe. I think here our Sapha had talked about that too. Like, how do you, can I be friends with my body? And can I know that how I treat myself, and I want to treat myself as I treat others, with that same compassion and care. And instead of saying what you don't want someone to do, say what you do want the person to do. So ask for putting out a clear request of what you'd like. Makes it much easier for people to respond to you. And before agreeing or disagreeing with anyone's opinion, including your own, tune into what you or the other person is feeling and needing. So this is bringing the connection back to nonviolent communication and the relationship with myself and others. If you're feeling upset, think about what need of yours wants attention and what you could do to connect with that need instead of thinking about what's wrong with yourself or others. So taking it out of the blame game and bringing it really into what need is happening here for you and others. The premise of nonviolent communication is that we all have the same needs. All humans have the same needs. And when we get into conflict, even within ourselves, it's because we're fighting about the strategy or the way to meet the need, but not the need itself. Instead of praising someone who did something you like, express gratitude by telling the person what was touched in you by what they said or did. So this is another way for us to connect with our own gratitude for ourselves. You know, I'm really grateful that I chose, as somebody earlier had said, about eating clean during this time. I'm really celebrating that in myself, that that's a choice that I made, that I'm enjoying cooking with my partner and I'm enjoying eating whole, fresh foods. So it's a way to really celebrate kind of that connection. And that's instead of saying you did a great job or you did a horrible job, but how do we express our gratitude in ways that connect with our needs rather than in a way that's static, like good or bad? So I'm noticing the time, and I also asked if you guys wanted to do a conscious eating exercise. So I'm wondering if you do have any food in front of you, like I do here, if you want to play with a conscious eating exercise. And the reason I love this is because it gives us a chance to slow down. So if you don't have it in front of you and you would like to, feel free to get some. I'll just tell you what's on my plate for fun. I have some broccoli sprouts, some walnuts, some of these, this chocolate that I love. It's called Hu, H-U. It's cacao and coconut sugar. I have an olive, a piece of banana, a celery, and a piece of apple. And so what I ask people to do in this conscious eating exercise is to just take a bite of one of those pieces of food and close your eyes and just notice everything about the experience. And so this is just an awareness exercise. It's a conscious exercise in bringing our awareness to really the food in front of us. And part of the reason I do this is because it helps us to slow down and really taste the food. I find sometimes when we're feeling guilty or we're in a hurry or we're feeling bad, we sometimes eat way quicker than our body is enjoying, and we didn't even taste what just went in. And so sometimes when we slow down, we find there's things we actually liked a lot more than we thought, and sometimes the reverse, something we thought we really enjoyed, we realized it wasn't as enjoyable as we then noticed. So it's really just an invitation to notice. So I'm not sure if all of you have something in front of you, so I would just walk you through the exercise, but it's done silently. And I'll give you some of the responses that people have had with the exercise. If they've noticed that slowing down really helped them, and they noticed that they tasted things they hadn't even tasted before. And some feelings and needs kind of came up in this experiment as well. And so it's something you can play with at any time. You could do it for 5 minutes of one meal a day, just as a practice to tune into feelings and needs. So it's a practice of nonviolent communication, and it's a practice of honoring your body and your digestive health as well. So that's an exercise that you may choose to play with. I'm regretful that you weren't able to see us. That would be really fun to be able to see each other and be able to play that way. But I'd love to know if there's any other questions or comments of anything that people might want to play with in the minutes that are left.
Right. And I think that you had a close-up question for Sapha and Kira as well. Is that right?
I absolutely do. Yeah.
Right.
Are there any other questions before we get there?
Pardon?
Are there any other questions before we get there? Anything from the participants that are out there?
There's a wonderful comment, though. I'm really grateful to know that even nutritionists can struggle with food choices, right? We're all human.
Absolutely all human. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I would just want to say how y'all are being really vulnerable here in your honesty and shares, and it makes a difference. It helps.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that that person brought it up, because to me, that's we're all here. We're all here in this together, in all of life. And so the more we can share vulnerability actually is what leads to connection. So that's a really key piece of nonviolent communication. Without vulnerability, we don't have that.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Lovely question here. Is there a nonviolent communication prayer or intention that they could say before eating to bring them into an open heart?
Oh, I love that question. I love that.
Too.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about a prayer, but I would, for me, I would just say, so I'm really want to be present to the food in this moment. And I really want to acknowledge like all the hands or all the beings that have been part of this process of this food coming to me. So really going back to that place of joyful giving and receiving. Can I receive this food with joy, with compassion and love, and take it in that spirit?
So there's a question coming back to the duck meter.
Yeah.
And I think it's relevant to what you just said, Sylvia. So I don't understand the duck meter, she says. The duck was receiving the bread, so he was joyful. Is this about giving because you want to?
Thank you for helping me clarify. So the reason that it's a duck meter is because you can't tell the difference between the giver and the receiver. So the child is getting so much joy from giving to that hungry duck that it looks like it's one and the same. You don't really know who the giver is and who the receiver is based on the joy from both.
Right. I think we're ready for your questions for Sapha and Kira.
So Sapha and Kira, so what would support you, so in supporting your clients to have the quality of relationship they would enjoy with their bodies and food? So is there anything that you're learning today or anything you want to share with participants about maybe what would be helpful in what you're learning to support them to support their clients?
So for me, I think one of the biggest helpers is to keep what I call a beginner's mind. In other words, I think often we get set into an anticipation of what a consultation with someone who addresses nutrition is going to be like. And if we are working with something very unique, particularly in the work that I do, for example, often it could be a shock when you don't get that. And I would say give yourself permission to access your beginner mind and give time to the process, and know that we are here to serve you. We're not here to put ourselves on a pedestal or anything like that, but be open to the process. And if it seems a little bit unique or completely strange or new to you, then let that be a wonderful new experience. And if it does scare you, observe that fear and try to remain with it a little bit longer and give yourself a chance to open up to new possibilities.
Thank you. Beautiful.
And I think for me, something for people to take away, myself included, is recognizing that the whole self-talk, self-care, self-love, that also very much ties into food. And so a lot of times we'll say, well, I want to go have that chocolate cake, or I want to eat those Doritos because that's going to make me feel good. But if we can start to change the narrative and realize that actually taking care of your body and doing the things that are going to actually serve you is a form of self-care. So not to say that you always have to opt for the kale salad or the broccoli, you can go for the chocolate cake, but realizing again that that is a form of self-care, and really tuning into the emotions like you both really encouraged us to do, and checking in, and why am I eating this? Do I want this? Is there something else right now that would satisfy that emotional need that's not necessarily food?
I love that. And so with that as well, what I would say another piece to add on is that notice not only how you feel when you're eating the food itself, because for me, that's really important. My body is giving me messages all the time. As the food's going down, 15 minutes later, a half an hour later, as it's digesting a couple hours later. So noticing what your body's saying. Is your body enjoying what just happened? So again, meeting my needs, not at the expense of my body for my emotional needs, but really in cooperation with. That's really compassionate or nonviolent communication with my body and food. Thank you so much for that. Just a couple things, people that might want more information about upcoming possibilities. I'm doing a nonviolent communication training live and online through Our Family Services. That's in Tucson, but it's online now, so it's available to anybody. And that's on Thursday from 9 to 1. And nonviolent communication in the family from 9 to 4 on June 6th. So there's an email address or the training site if you want more information about that. I also want to let you know, so this is the book that we're gonna give out one of those to somebody that's participating today. And I also have 2 guidebooks that are available that can go with that book as an accompaniment. And it's one that you can use with your clients with adults and one with children. And so that's also just lots of questions to ask, just to uncover what's really important for people that are wanting to change their relationship with food in their bodies. Any last questions or comments? I would love to hear.
There was a question about online groups or classes that address or support this, but I think you've just offered, the trainings that you're having and the resources that you have. But is there something else you would add to that, Sylvia?
I would say if there's anything that in particular that you might be wanting, feel free. I'm leaving my the page up with my email address and phone number. Feel free to contact me and ask for what you want. That's pretty much how I offer training. It's based on what people's needs are and what they're requesting.
Good response. And, it's a great speaker, great question here that I didn't pose in the beginning, but it's like, is this a real giraffe at the dinner table?
I think it's from Giraffe Manor. It's somewhere in South Africa. And there's a lot of pictures of giraffes. Yeah. And sweet that it has one of the largest hearts of any land animal. So that's what
Right.
I'm most with the giraffe.
Okay.
If I could show you my ears as well. I have giraffe ears as well.
There's a question about if the 3 of you have what your Instagram handles are. So if you get those to me, I'll be able to respond to her after the fact. I just want to say, this conversation was so personal. You expressed such vulnerability, and it's such a valuable conversation to be having. I want to thank the audience too for your participation, for your willing to be revealing of things that you might not want to tell everybody, but to be able to share and be part of this. So thank you all for that. I'll remind you that we are recording this, and it'll be available on the Hawthorn website under archived webinars in just a few days. As Sylvia said, there's a survey to fill out after the webinar ends. It's short, but it helps us to have your feedback and comments about this presentation. So I appreciate you taking the time. And as Sylvia said, one of you will be chosen to receive a gift of the book. And we'd love to put that into your hands as well. Our next webinar, it's a 2-part. It's on June 2nd and 19th coming up. And we're having David Crow come back, just a fabulous presenter. He'll be sharing his expertise on herbs and essential oils to support our immunity. And our next All About Alumni graduate interview is going to be on Wednesday, June 6th at 12 noon Pacific time with our Master's in Health and Nutrition Education graduate, Tracy Mitchell. She's going to be presenting about her postgraduate activities, accomplishments, and challenges. I'd say this is one to tune into for sure. We've had so many great previous grad interview presentations. You can check them out in our archives. Particularly look for Sapha, Arias, and Whitham. They were both fantastic, and we should have you back. Again, both of you to talk about what's continued to evolve in your businesses.
Beautiful.
And, I just want to say, if we've inspired you in this presentation today to learn more about health and nutrition with all the webinars we've offered over the years, we remind you that Hawthorn also offers a variety of nourishing programs and courses. So I encourage you to visit our website for more details. And if you're ready for some personalized attention, you can reach out to our admissions team. Right. I think that brings us to a conclusion for today's presentation. So thank you so much, Sylvia. Thank you, Sapha. Thank you,
Yeah.
Kira.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
You both. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, James Bernardinelli, for helping us with all of our tech stuff. And just everybody, thank you for sharing this educational experience with us. I want to wish you all the best of health, and I sure look forward to learning more together at Hawthorn's webinars and All About Alumni series. And until then, I'm sure going to continue to tend my conscious eating and my health and my happiness and my compassion and my kindness, because what we practice grows stronger. So please join me in this too, and I'll see you back here again as soon as possible. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.